Alrighty, so welcome to week 7 in CIT 93 JavaScript. Couple things I want to cover today. One is just FYI, the last date to drop. Now, I always tell students what this date is. I'm not making a recommendation for anyone, but I just want you to know when it is because after this date, you will get a grade in the class. So make sure and actually, if you're watching this close to week 7, you're probably fine and caught up, but I just want students to know, right? So, what that is. So, what I want to talk about today in week 7 is that we're 2 weeks away from the technical interview signups. Now, this is not when they start, although, you were going to you want to think about the timing, and you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. Um, there are two types of 30-minute interviews you can choose from. This is what I was saying last week, but I thought, well, you know what? It's a really good time to talk about it. So if you choose a walkthrough, what this means is it's worth 75 max. The item is worth 100 points. But if you take this option, we review specific parts of the code for your decision-making app. You walk me through the code and answer questions I ask. Okay, so in this 30-minute session, that's how I would grade you. Now, I just want you to know you have 2 attempts at this. Okay, either one of these. Like I've actually had one student attempt this one, do fine on it, and then come in and do this one. Some of students just went right for this one. Most students honestly chose the walkthrough because at this point you've seen that decision-making app code through the carbon footprint, you've seen it through the U codes, you've been tested on it in the AI, so the idea is that you can walk through and discuss what that code is doing. It's not that you have to have all the technical terms, but have an understanding of what the code is doing is what I'm looking for. If you decide to do a code challenge, then what I would give you is I'd give you a live coding challenge, probably based off your decision making app, to where you would have variables, functions, arrays, objects, and some kind of iteration and DOM updates. Those are the major things we would handle there. But this one is a little more like, once you determine this, that I go in and do some like looking at your decision making app and thinking how we could do that. You and I can have a discussion beforehand about that as well. Now, here's the key: is you have whichever path you choose, you have 2 attempts, but your first attempt must be complete before May 1st. And what I'm going to show you here is this technical interview sign up. Okay. Now, I haven't actually done all the updates to it. I'll be doing that soon. But if I scroll forward, kind of like I did last week, the window for signing up comes after you complete week 9. Okay. So, and this is not until this is not until the end of the semester. So it's open now. And what you basically do is you look at the schedule. So the schedule is as follows. So it starts after week 9. So I do have a few spots open before we go into break. And so what would happen is you would submit this with your dates that you want to see. Because if I have students asking for the same date, I'll take the student who asked first and I look at day and time submissions. Okay. Now, also, these are my office hours. So if you're going to need something outside of there, the more of a heads up you and I could do to negotiate what that is, because I have things scheduled at a certain part after the day, but I'm willing to be as flexible as I can be with heads up. But know that I'm not going to do one of these after 7 o'clock at night. The latest I would do one would be 6 at night. And I would only do that based on my schedule as well. So you and I would have to negotiate that. So what I do in here is I give you, hey, here are my office hours, because of course those work best for me because that's really what I'm there for. So I've given you week 12, 13, 14, 15, and then you'll see here that after May 1st, okay, then you can only have one attempt after this. So I generally suggest the following: is try your first attempt, determine which one you want to do, come in sooner rather than later to get a feel for what it is maybe you need to go get help on, right? And really, honestly, this is where already getting help before now can be really helpful, which is why I'm talking about it in week 7. Okay, so let's go back here. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a little more understanding of what these are, and they are real world. I mean, you're whatever field you're in, whether it's CIT, whether it's web development, whether it's something else, and you're just here for whatever your personal reasons may be. Tech interviews are a thing in the tech industry. This is just, I mean, I've had to go through them to where somebody actually sit down and ask me to do something or explain something. I've actually had both of these types of interviews. Okay, so now what we're going to do here, now we're going to switch gears, which by the way, you could, and I didn't say this, I realized this, but you could in your reply ask me anything about the tech interview, but you could also reach out to me directly. All right, so switching gears now. So for the graded part of the work, what I want you to do now is now that you've been through step one, okay, is I want you to actually go and upgrade your decision making logic. Now, some of you actually did some of this work already, but I do have a link to the attendance, and then we'll come back and look at this. So basically, what you're doing here is you're upgrading the brain of your app, right? So your decision.js. Now, this may be named something specific to your app, which is fine. Just know that's where all the logic for your decision making happens. And I'd said in step one that you could actually just write a function that you export that returns an object that has just a single decision for now, but as these things grow, and they will, and in this case, even if it hasn't grown, you still need to write a helper function. And we saw these helper functions if you look back at the calculation.js and the carbon footprint as well. Okay, so what you're going to make is more professional by by using named helper functions and returning a detailed flat object. And all that means, and you'll see an example in a minute of what I have. And again, this is no different than the carbon footprint. Okay. So the helper function requirement, refactor your code to use at least one helper function, right? A helper function is a small function that has one specific job, right? We've seen these again. Go back and look at carbon footprint. We wrote several. It makes your main logic cleaner and easier to read. Identify the part that you're going to do, and then move on to it, and then move it into its own function. So now, if you wrote some, you'll need to also make sure that your logic did the following. Your logic needs to use all the inputs, whatever the inputs were for your decision, okay? So cannot ignore data. If the form asks for it, you must code it. Okay, so it has to be in there somewhere. Ensure that every single input is used somewhere in your if else or switch statements, right? Or your helper functions to determine a final result. And then what you're going to do is return that object. Now, we were already returning that object, but now I want you to make sure you also include the factors. Okay, so, and this says flat just because these are all in one object that's getting returned. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Okay, so now this is no different, but your main export function will return a single flat object, right? It should not just answer the decision, but include all the key data points, the factors that led to the decision. Now, I'm giving you an example here, right? Because we had talked about the different patterns that could be chosen in step one, and you can go back and look at those, right? So the example here is actually the advisor. Okay, so here's the example. Now, the idea is not to take this example because you need to be writing this for your decision specific app. Okay, but here's an example of determine project actions, right? So here's your main function. And so we're calling calculate urgency. We're passing, and in this case, I'm passing a variable that's block scoped called inputs that's probably form data. And then we're passing in the inputs data until due. And then what this does is it determines if days left less than or equal to 2, it returns high, else it returns low. Okay. Now that's a very simple example, right? And then it has some other logic to determine if it's on hold, and then there's some logic here to determine what the decision would be. Okay, so if the urgency level strictly equal to high and the input importance is 8, and this is just a numerical, then it says if the team size is greater than, so it says, hey, based on this condition and this, and if also your team is larger than 3, delegate to the team, else do it yourself. Okay, else importance less than 5, then put it on the backlog. So this is a pretty standard way to write if else logic for making decisions. And so now in this case, and I'm giving you this for a reason, right? So not that again you use it word for word, that you write it for your app. So then you return a main decision, right? So the main decision is the key, and the value is whatever you determine based on your logic. So your main result, and then here's your urgency. So this was the factor that was determined. Your remaining days was input so this actually was returned, right? Because this urgency level, right, was returned here from calling that helper function. And these are just the inputs that were passed in. So make sure it works, right? And make sure you send it back. Okay, so let me come back over here. So now that you know more specifically what that decision logic needs to be, the question is, did you write for your step 1? And I'll modify that to say step. I actually said it here, right? So now is the time. If not, if you didn't do it, then you need to attempt to write one or more helper functions for your decision-making app, right? Make sure your logic still works after your code still works after the new logic. Once you're done in your post, tell us your experience of writing this logic and which pattern you selected from step 1. Okay, so again, in here, I've shown you, I've demonstrated here that the example below is the advisor to evaluate specific condition and determines a category, but there was also the pattern A, which is the scorer or the summarizer. Okay, so back here, right? So now if you did write them, so make sure if you did write a helper function, make sure that if you did it, you also return the factors. You may actually have to come up and do that. Okay, so if yes, make sure you review the requirements listed up here, right? If you met all the requirements, and in your post, tell us how you approach coding your decision and the pattern. So whichever path, yes or no, you do have to tell us the pattern you're using from step 1 and your decision logic would be in. And for both of these, I should have put this: don't share your code. That's not the idea. So now in your reply, and I've shown you an example here, but I actually show you how this is done, is display your return object keys and values for the input and the decision, right? And in your post, use a pre, and I'll show you how I did this, and write at least 100 words covering the information that I talked about here. Okay, do a substantive reply. So this is worth 80 points here. Okay, so here's what I did in the reply, and I'm actually going to do this is I'm actually going to edit it so you can see this, okay? So what I did is I put some text, and I just put some text, and then I went into the HTML, and then I put a pre, and then I put the actual returned, or sorry, in this case, the input. So these were the inputs, my form data, right? And then these were, and then I don't know why I put a BR here. Does it need it? Probably not. BR is a line break. Yeah, actually I can see I have an extra one. Oh, actually I do need it. I must have one right there. Huh. So I could look at that code to see why it's needed there. But in this case, the pre, and then you put the object. And the reason is it just looks nicer. Pre is pre-formatted. Okay, and so what you want to do is have your output look like this, and all you have to do, if I was to actually come down here, I could put example, right? And then now in this case, I can already tell by looking at it what happened here is actually the example went inside the pre, so I'd probably take it out, put it here, right? And then put, like if I come back here, like here, so you can see this is content, just regular content from typing in the discussion. And then here's what I would do my pre, and then I would copy and paste. I'd copy and paste whatever my return. So this is the decision object, right? And this is my input object. So I want to see both of those. And then how I will grade this is I will look at, did you meet the requirements above, right? And so all of this work is worth 80 points, and here this is worth 20. Okay, hope this gives you an idea of what we're doing this week and also about the technical review. Please, if you want to include a question about that, you can do that on this output as well. And make sure you do the writing for this part. Remember, 100 words minimum. Okay, talk to you later.